podcast excellence since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network, kingofpodcasts.com.
There was a time when media did have diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now that idea is being dropped, extinguished, and incinerated.
The King of Podcasts radio network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
And here we are. This is episode 370 of the Broadcasters Podcast, available to all of you through the courtesy of kingofpodcasts.com. Of course, you can find the show on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. Maybe you've heard all of those. Well, that's where you find it. So tonight, we talk about various lettered instances in the media that are very prominent right now. They're just, it's a disruption on top of a disruption. It's a triple threat. So we knew that the media establishment was going to probably go through some changes. It's been going on since the digital disruption happened. Well, now a political disruption has also caused things to come into place, and a technological disruption on top of the digital disruption of the internet is continuing to go and take media to another end. And there's no answer for this. But we see the change now more than ever. And there's a lot of it being talked about. So, on the political front, we know that there's a change from the presidential election. We made that very clear. And we've talked about how podcasting's really benefited out of it. What we haven't talked about much as of late was recent changes from the political end, which again, I'm not getting into all this, but it has to be reported because it is important. We know that some of the decisions for diversity, equity, inclusion, they have been instrumental in much of the content that we watch from the media establishment. So that is your studios, your broadcast networks, your cable networks, all that. Those corporations, they have all been susceptible to the idea of, in a way, I look at it when I report on the cannabis industry, there are corporate divisions. They don't necessarily call it DEI. They call it corporate social responsibility. It's a matter of, it's not based on culture, but that's actually the direction that I think would be best for what DEI turns into. Because the aspect of the diversity, equity, inclusion that has been done here, when you listen to the letters, obviously they do sound very honorable. But we also know there's a political agenda among that. And that's the thing. If the media wants to continue to have some level of diversity, equity, inclusion, I talk about this all the time on the Blunt Business program I do on Cannabis Radio. When I have had people on that represent areas of corporate social responsibility, CSR. Those are three new letters you can actually talk about as well. And the thing is that I think it's more important to understand it's not necessarily in the talent that you bring on board or the people that you have that are creating programming, as it is the management. That the management and the hierarchy of all these corporations, if they did have a setup of those that were in a level of corporate social responsibility, you have people that obviously on merit, based on their experience, their true experience, they're able to go ahead and enter into these companies and become prominent. But it's also, you can't go to extreme on the other end where it is DEI. That's where I think everybody's kind of trying to get the understanding here, is that there is a level of a boundary. There's a boundary you can't stretch only so far. Because there is DEI for the sake of DEI. And has it really been good for the advent of the programming that we get? Because look at how many programs we have that really institute those standards in the programming, because they have to fill a certain quota. It has to go ahead and fit a certain diverse, equitable, and inclusive cast from the talent on screen the people off screen and the people that are making the moves to allow these programs or these movies to go along. It's obvious that there's a support for it because we see what the elite, the Hollywood elite and the award shows and the particular organizations that are looking at this, they want to go and have something where for themselves, it's a feel-good thing about saying, well, instead of just creating new content for the sake of new content, it's been swayed away by, okay, if it's not working, we need to go and build a lot of money on intellectual property, a lot of big brand name franchises, whether it's for network TV, cable TV, or streaming or movies. And then that money we offset into these other projects. And I could tell you a number of shows that probably have come out in the last few years that have been susceptible to being cut because it didn't work out, because the audience determined that the shows were not going to be doing any good. The money, the cost towards it to get no audience for it, I mean, that's the part that people need to go and worry about. So if I just take whatever TV shows and movies that have been canceled since 2020 that emphasized diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a lot of shows we could take out right away since 2020. Lovecraft Country, it had 18 Emmy nominations in 2021. Canceled by HBO after the first season. Our Flag Means Death. 2 seasons in January 2024. Canceled by Max. It was praised for its LGBTQ plus representation. Dead End Paranormal Park. Netflix canceled an animated series, this one, that had featured a transgender male character after 2 seasons. The Owl House. Disney had an animated series known for its LGBTQ plus characters. In 2021, cited that it did not fit the company's brand. It was canceled. Nimona, initially canceled by Disney in 2021 due to the closure of Blue Sky Studios. And the animated film featured LGBTQ plus themes and later revived and released by Netflix in 2023. But it's moved around. And there are more that we have right now just in the last 12 months. American Born Chinese, 1 season on Disney Plus, canceled. Our Flag Means Death, we just mentioned. Schmigadoon, 2 seasons of Apple TV Plus, canceled. A League of Their Own, I think it only had 1 season on Amazon. Station 19 will be ending a 7th season in 2024. That's a network show. 911 Lone Star is being canceled. Somebody Somewhere, canceled by HBO. My Lady Jane, canceled by Prime Video. The Acolyte, canceled by Disney Plus. Grease, The Rise of the Pink Ladies, canceled by Paramount Plus. All in the last year. The Times.co.uk mentioned how these cancellations have raised concerns about the industry's commitment to DEI initiatives, especially amid broader corporate shifts away from such programs. Disney has softened recently content warnings on classic films and restructured its DEI efforts, reflecting a broader trend in corporate diversity policies. Well, that's done. Because Hollywood now is resetting. DEI is no longer. The Wrap put out a story today as I go ahead and read about this, and this is in response to an executive order created by the Trump administration. So a number of things have already started happening in this political change of this political climate. Disney is now scaling back its DEI efforts. Comcast is now facing an FCC investigation over policies seeking to promote inclusion. So Drew Taylor in the Wrap reports that this is now sending tremors throughout the entertainment industry. Executives and creatives wonder whether the hard-won gains in equality and more balanced representation will be lost or worse, punished. But before you go on with that, this whole thing was a movement, an advocacy movement, to try to go ahead and create this possibility. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and judge whether this was bad or good. Well, like any good corporate business, the bottom line has to be considered. There's only so much you can go and offset for programming that does not benefit or does not profit said company. So that's the part. Hard-won gains in equality and more balanced representation. I know there's a couple of things that might be said about who was really benefiting from the DEI itself. People felt like, there's particular groups within the diversity, equity, inclusion that also benefited. Again, I'm not here being political about it. I'm just making the point. So there was obviously a movement, and this is going on for a good over a decade, more than that. But what happened was, if Hollywood now was not able to go ahead and increase their bottom line, increase their shares for their shareholders, the prices for those shares, increase their subscriptions for the streaming services, or stabilize or improve their ratings among their linear content. Well, there's something wrong there. Among their linear channels, there's something wrong there. They have to keep going. And when they want to continue to initiate this, okay, for Disney, scaling back, part of it is, okay, how far do you go with this? Because again, multi-trenched into entertainment. Does this go into what? Merchandise, theme parks? It's been spread all across. And all across, there's issues where Disney has had issues across the board. So a couple days ago, there was a Reimagine Tomorrow program that has been dropped. And that was according to an SEC filing on Monday. So the mission from Disney of Reimagine Tomorrow was to amplify underrepresented voices and untold stories, as well as championing the importance of accurate representation in media entertainment. Now, when they say accurate representation in media entertainment, let's just make sure they're clear that the actual demographic of America is not what they're scaling representation on. It's what they were trying to do was they were trying to balance out certain voices, certain people. I don't even think it was so much about culture. It was more about race, more about gender. That's clear about that. I understand that part. I see that's what they're trying to do. The Chief Human Resources Officer, Sonia Coleman, filed on Tuesday with an internal memo now where they're going to shift away from DEI. They will now have a new evaluation metric with a new talent strategy factor, more focused on how employees are driving business success, merit. So they're going to go merit-based. But the thing is that it's not as if you can't continue DEI in some way, shape, or form as a corporate social responsibility. The thing is that what you want to do is, instead of trying to shove down people's throats what you think they're supposed to be watching and how they should be, appreciating the representation that you're trying to accurately scale and balance for the audiences. If they're not responding to that, you do it different ways. Again, what you do is there are things within a certain culture or a certain demographic that will cross over. But there's been no crossover allowed. It's been pushed away. If you're doing something where you have a corporate social responsibility within all these corporations and say, okay, we need to look out for the best content that we can get our hands on. Okay, best scripts, best screenplays, best talent that's out there that will fit this corporate social responsibility. That we want to make sure that there are voices and there are talents that might be overlooked. And they're going to get a chance to get the pipeline and get the runway into becoming somebody or big part. And also, you got to think about those that are already within the corporation, that they always need to make sure that if they have a seat at the table, they replace themselves with someone else like-minded and from the same neighborhood. And I'll talk about that as well on the Blunt Business program. When you're going to do where there is a certain mix of who's in the conference room, it's always a great example that if a woman has that position, she needs to find another woman to take her place. If that person is black, Hispanic, Indian, Chinese, whatever. If you want to keep the representation there, thriving, then you find someone and make sure you are recruiting them into your spot. So they take the spot and continue on with it. The leniency, the legacy continues. Okay? those are other things I look at. Now, Disney also says they're going to have also an evolution of important concepts that'll be used along storytelling, creativity, and synergy. And they're going to be reportedly shutting down the Reimagine Tomorrow program and their website altogether. And they will now be updating the trigger warning before it shows viewers stream old movies like Dumbo and Peter Pan, according to Axios. The current warning, they say, contains negative depictions and or mistreatment of peoples or cultures. It will now say the program is presented as originally created and may contain stereotypes or negative depictions. Fine. We know that people will change, and we also know we're not looking to go ahead and I don't think that the audience is looking backwards and looking to try to find movies and programs that are of a different nature. Listen, we're all technologically advanced. We also don't want to see the same story retold. We want to see new stories. That's the other part I think that people don't understand either. See, instead of giving us new content that is mainstream, large scale, and entertaining, they have been taking time to go ahead and put other programming out there, other content, and shoving it in. And if people don't like it, they don't like it. You can't change people's minds. You could try after a while to open people up to new content, but you just can't make them say, okay, this is what's going to happen. That's it. Now, also, and other companies are also going down in the same way about the DEI programs. Meta, Google, and Target on the major corporate front were going to be canceling or trimming their programs. Now, aside from Disney, the other thing that was happening was this. That Hollywood had spent years, if not decades, listening to interest groups advocate for entertainment that reflects more society. Okay, but then the interest groups that would have been very vocal about this, the RAP reached out to NAACP, GLAAD, ACLU, and Color of Change. They all declined to comment, saying nothing about this change. It's shocking. And I'm actually kind of surprised. If they want to go and stand up for this, why are they buckling? Why are they not being vocal? What happened there? That's a very important thing, because these are all organizations that have been around for a long time. And the thing is that if the DEI programs in all these different corporations, especially in media, if they're going to be scaled down or trimmed or removed completely in that corporate social responsibility, that same corporate social responsibility should be in communications with these organizations. Count La Raza, count whatever you want. They should be in communication with these different organizations to continue to advocate for their particular groups, interest groups. So where's that? I think that's very interesting. And so some of the things you would think about, what would change now and how the studios will manifest the change. What storylines could be shifted? Will there be a change where gay characters are going to be phased out in youth-oriented content? Will the plot lines of Pixar movies recently pushed out, leaning heavily on inclusion, be recast? Would you no longer have a Little Mermaid that's cast by where they cast Halle Bailey in the lead role as Ariel? I don't know. I mean, of what they're talking about here, obviously there's Pixar movies that did well. Inside Out, did very well, right? Isn't that a Pixar movie? Disney did very well in that movie. Little Mermaid might not have made as much money as they could have, but they did make money no matter what. And she's very talented. Halle Bailey's very talented, so I don't think anyone was thinking about that. We'll see what happens now when the Snow White movie that comes out, where there's a bit of that. There's still movies that are going to be coming out that will still have these initiatives that were in place beforehand. How will they perform? You got to ask yourself that. What's going to happen? So then we talk about Comcast being investigated by the FCC. And the chairman for the FCC, we've been talking about him for the last 2 weeks. He says there's substantial evidence that the media conglomerate Comcast and NBC Universal are promoting invidious forms of DEI in a way that illegally discriminates. And that the DEI mentioned on the website is a core value of its business, Public reports state it has an entire DEI infrastructure, including DEI annual days, training for the company's leaders, and initiatives on the TV and programming side of the business. So that's being investigated. And now Brandon Carr wants an accounting of these initiatives, preferences, mandates, policies, programs, and activities. And they will be all reported to the Enforcement Bureau of the FCC. And then the other area we had that DEI was also very much focused on here was public broadcasting. AP reporting about now that PBS is now shutting down its Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And they've already fired 2 executives that were brought on when the effort was begun in 2021. Now, the PBS CEO, Paula Kerger, says that they are committed to telling the stories of all Americans before we had an office, and will continue to do it afterwards. PBS gets federal funding through the U.S. Department of Education and National Science Foundation for children's programming. Systems lawyers determined that it needed to comply with the executive order that was put out by the Trump administration. The system gets some $535 million of general support from the government, about 16% of its budget. This is just PBS, not NPR. And it's filtered to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And some 330 member stations of PBS have their own individual efforts at DEI and receive Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding. It will be up to them to decide what to do with their offices. But we are encouraging them to have lawyers look at their circumstances, according to Paula Kerger talking to the Associated Press. And there are still continued talks about PBS and NPR being dropped of government funding. Again, 10 to 16% of their annual budget. But that would not knock these stations off the air. As I said before, I don't know what you do with PBS. I couldn't tell you. But I do think that when it comes to what NPR does, I always thought that their podcasting is still, regardless of, and I know people actually gave me shit about this on a previous episode about my comments about NPR and PBS. And if I can find those real quick, I'll let you know exactly what they told me. Because there were some people that did get upset. Now, I already did tell you about this last week, where NPR and PBS were told that it's pure and total propaganda. So there was somebody that actually said that. And I know this, I understand what they're saying. Okay. And I forget who else that wrote to me that says, oh, but just because they have nice microphones and they have, good sounding, whatever, it's still propaganda that they're spewing out. I get that part. Like, you're never going to go ahead and change the complete level of what PBS or NPR and what their content's going to be. I mean, you could try. I mean, if there's a complete change, I guess that's a different story. But there is what public broadcasting expects, what their audience expects. So are you going to go and just deny them that? Because I don't think there's a point where NPR or PBS is going to try to attract new viewers by completely changing their brand. That's the other thing I think you got to think about too. What are these going to be doing with themselves? Now, DEI, that's going to be a different change. That's fine. But there's a point where they're going to still try to exist the way they are because they've been built in one particular way forever in public broadcasting. And I don't know if they could do any other way. I don't know if they can do anything where they could change their programming that's going to bring conservative viewers over to it or something like that. Whatever. Kind of some construed idea. Because there are just certain brands that are synonymous with who they are. Cable news is like that. And you can say the same thing goes for various other programming that's out there. Like, there's just certain programming that goes to a certain audience and people just flock to that channel for what that content is. I don't think you're going to just change. You just can't change channels or brands overnight and make them something else. That's not possible now. So that's the DEI issue that's going on at the moment. But then the other issue, which is more for the publishers out there, it's all about AI. And AI continues to be a big deal. And there's a lot of stories that came across the board regarding AI. And by the way, coming up a little bit later on, we now have a cavalcade, a caravan of artists in music that are now standing behind and supporting the American Music Fairness Act. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, a little bit later on. journalists are trying to get together and put in a united front against AI. So there was a collective of news and magazine publishers. That includes Advanced Local Media, Condé Nast, The Atlantic, Forbes Media, The Guardian, Business Insider, LA Times, McClatchy Media Company, Newsday, Plain Dealer Publishing Company, Politico, The Republican Company, Toronto Star Newspapers, and Vox Media. They're all members of the leading industry trade association, the News Media Alliance, filed a copyright and trademark infringement case in the Southern District of New York against Cohere. And Cohere is an AI company valued at over $5 billion. They were engaged in this full complaint and widespread unauthorized use of publisher content in developing and running its generative AI systems. And the behavior of Cohere amounts to massive systematic copyright infringement as well as trademark infringement. The copyright provides a non-exhaustive list of thousands of articles that they have infringed through training, real-time use of content, and infringing outputs. And so plaintiffs are seeking permanent injunction and damages for Cohere's extensive and willful infringement. Hey, so you now have a company that I haven't even heard about yet, but obviously a very profitable company, a highly valued multi-billion-dollar company in AI with Cohere, now getting sued. So Perplexity was just going through the same issue last year. OpenAI has also had their own issues. And it's the normal course of action. These publishers, these editors, these newspapers, these magazines, all of it, these websites, they're going to keep trying to fight for their existence because, I will say it over again like a broken record, AI is going to continue to go ahead and run roughshod over these companies. And then eventually, there will be a point where you can keep trying to ask for bargaining codes from your government. You can keep putting out lawsuits all you want. And then you make deals with these companies once you can't get much out of the lawsuit from them, whatever it might be. Or maybe you'll get a payday off of it, and that might help to sustain your businesses just a little bit longer to survive before they become extinct. But then, when it's all said and done, these companies will not be able to go and get the revenue that they need to be able to survive and thrive. And what they will do is they will be sold at pennies on the dollar, and the AI companies will sweep them up for nothing. What good does that do for all of you? Daniel Coffey, President and CEO of the News Media Alliance. As news, magazine, and media publishers, we serve an important role in keeping society informed and supporting the free flow of information and ideas. We cannot continue to do so if AI companies like Cohere are able to undercut our businesses while using our own content to compete with us. Hey, you could have done something to kind of control what was going on with this anyway. But when AI was coming in, you don't want to play with them. You want them to work with you. Like as if you still have the leverage. And now you don't. And you can go and flex your muscle and put your lawyers out in front of this, but it's probably not going to get so much. At the end of the day, arbitrate. You get your damages. You make a deal with Cohere with you. Oh, we'll help out in your local journalistic efforts. Oh, we'll give you money individually on these different areas, right? We'll put together some tort suit and here's a settlement. Okay, we'll spend all this money back to give to you. Because what will happen is a company like Cohere, they can go ahead and make deals with these companies. Well, let us go ahead and access your archives. Let's just go ahead and let us go ahead and be able to write stories for you, help assist in your writing and your content for your magazine, your newspaper. Let us help you out. We're going to help out a little bit. And that's how you get you. It will continue. There's no answer for this. They don't have an answer for all of it. Condé Nast make the point that the New Yorker, Vogue, GQ, Wired, Vanity Fair, and other many iconic brands cannot live up to their exceptional standards if we allow their content to be stolen, distorted, or trafficked. That's from Roger Lynch, the CEO of Condé Nast. And there are other people that are also quoted in here. So in this case, they say that is this. Cohere's use unlicensed copies of publishers' news and magazine articles in training and real-time copying. And they claim, Cohere claims its chatbot's key differentiator is the ability to provide quote-unquote verified answers, which Cohere's own product reveals real-time content extracted from publishers. Now, Cohere copies publishers' content at times from behind paywalls, where the publisher has explicitly blocked Cohere's bot from scraping. And their product for Cohere has spit out verbatim regurgitations and substantial summaries of news content, even when the prompt does not mention a specific article or publication, and provides an illustrative list of 4,000 examples as a result. Cohere also had a free ride with a feature called Under the Hood, where Cohere was making full copies without authorization and the articles that power its outputs. And when not copying publisher content, Cohere engages in damaging hallucinations. They often deliver fake pieces under the publisher's names, confusing the public and damaging publishers' valuable brands by falsely associating publishers with content that lacks the quality that readers expect from publishers. That's not good. But the fact that the News Media Alliance, it took them a long time for them to go ahead and jump onto this and put this lawsuit together. That's concerning. Who is not paying attention to what's going on with your content? That's one thing that should be very clear. Like, don't you have some technological people back there that should be able to find out, hey, somebody is trying to, dig into our content. Like, where's your tech team on this? Where's tech support? How come they didn't track this down? And why did this not become a bigger issue to the point where now you have this lawsuit at the worst time because you're not going to get anything back from it? Just saying. There will not be. And this got a lot of press. Wall Street Journal also talked about this as well. But of course, they have a very strong paywall. That's why I don't bother reading them. Press Gazette also wrote about this. And again, 14 publishers, major publishers, went after Cohere. But there are a number of particular lawsuits already in place right now. There are news publishers suing AI platforms. You have the News Media Alliance right now with Cohere. Then we also had Indian news publishers versus OP and AI. We talked about that last week. A coalition of Canadian news outlets against OpenAI. News Corp, Fox, New York Post, and others up against Perplexity. Mumsnet going up against OpenAI. The Center for Investigative Reporting versus OpenAI and Microsoft. 8 Alden Global Capital newspapers against OpenAI and Microsoft. The Intercept, Raw Story, and Alternate versus OpenAI. New York Times versus OpenAI and Microsoft. And Getty Images versus Stability AI. But then there are the ones that have made deals, and this is a longer list. Ooh, this is a big list. And this is so far. And like I said, these are the ones that, like, after the lawsuits, hey, you know what? We're just going to play ball with them. We'll take their money, right? With OpenAI, they have made deals with Shabiston, Axios Future, Hearst, Condé Nast, Time, Vox Media, The Atlantic, News Corp, Dotdash Meredith, Financial Times, Le Monde and Prisa Media, Axel Springer, Associated Press, and Shutterstock. And then with Perplexity, they now have Independent, LA Times, Lee Enterprises, and more. They have Time, Der Spiegel, Fortune, Texas Tribune, and more. They're all working on it. Reuters is now working with Meta. They're all making deals. They might as well just take the money. And I don't know what they do with their particular business models, but they need to figure out what they're going to do. And more importantly, I talk about this with AI. With journalists, if you are aspiring journalists now, you understand that the role that you have with AI and what you are going to be doing now as a journalist going forward, your role is changing. You need to be a Swiss Army knife. You need to be multifaceted, multi-skilled, multi-talented if you want to succeed in this business. In some cases, you might have to go independent yourself. But if you're able to go and learn how to be a good arbiter, a good hunter-gatherer of news and information, or whatever you're trying to write about, because you need to make sure the right input is going into the AI system, into the writers. And you need to make sure that you have quality control. So those same people need to make sure that the machines are getting the right information and is putting out the right information correctly and logically. You need important human input. And if you figure that out, you're going to do very well. Just saying it will work that way. I just know it will be like that. OpenAI right now has offered news organizations between $1 million and $5 million per year to license their copyrighted content to train their models. News Corp's deals right now is more than $250 million over 5 years. But again, news organizations are taking the deal to license their content. $1 to $5 million per year. It's not much for some of these big companies. Apple's been exploring AI deals with the likes of Condé Nast, NBC News, and People and Daily Beast. Owner IAC, the licensor, content archives, but nothing's been made public. There's more and more to it. And I don't know what else you're going to do about it, but this is where we are. It's a big deal. And we see all these outlets right now and what they're trying to do, and they can only do so much. So they're stuck. Among other areas we could talk about, journalism, AI tools are lacking corporate responsibility. See, when they're trying to do the AI tools themselves, they are missing. There's a new report warning journalists against relying on AI tools when reporting on the Global South, specifically for article writing, editing, translation, and summarization. Right. Let me tell you, I get the part. Like I know for me, when I'm trying to use AI for my own content, I have to make sure the right input's in there. You got to be a better journalist. You got to be much more attention to detail. Extremely important. So there's a conclusion emerging from a recent report by the Media and Journalism Research Center, an independent think tank investigating 100 companies behind the AI tools most commonly used and recommended by journalists. Okay. According to this research, 33%, only 33% of the companies are transparent about who owns and finances them. The rest fall to adequately disclose related information. The report highlights that consumers may not be aware of the source of AI-generated information, which is presented as factual by journalists. And these tools are predominantly owned and operated by private sector entities. And they also further suggest in this report that while some larger companies demonstrated better transparency, questions remain about whether this is driven by genuine accountability or societal or social expectations. It also takes issue with the disparities in AI tool ownership, with most companies based in the global north, further complicating their relevance for journalists in the global south. Most companies examined here are small businesses or startups, and there was the importance of transparency and funding, as financial backers can indirectly shape the biases and outputs of AI tools, impacting public perception and truth, particularly in fact-checking research. And there's a sort of a broader initiative, according to this report, to promote transparency AI use within media and journalism, calling for longitudinal studies to track trends in ownership and investment. So they also say in this report they are urging newsrooms to embrace a culture of transparency, ensuring journalists critically assess the origins, development, and potential biases of AI tools before integrating them into their work. Yeah, I agree with that. You need to know also what's going to be written out of that content when it gets generated. When you render whatever information that you are feeding into this system, that's going to take that input and make it written properly. Of course, you're going to expect it's going to learn as a language learning model. It will learn from these mistakes, but you need to correct it as you go along. From this article, quote, ask where the information is coming from and whether it is going to influence your journalism. What are the potential biases the AI could proliferate? Because even the AI and whoever built the algorithm could also shape bias. Very important. So you got to be much more critical if you're going to use AI for journalistic efforts or for whatever you're going to use it for. Just keep that in mind because it's very important to go and look at that. And I agree with that. There's also a new MIT technology review that is reporting highlights on about AI transforming the media and entertainment industry, enhancing content production while also posing challenges for businesses adapting to rapid technological shifts. And so this report is called Designing the Future of Entertainment, produced in partnership with Nokia, and is based on insights from industry executives, startup founders, and analysts, and various corporations like PwC, Seneca College, StoryFit, Databricks, Twin, Anderson Analysis, MIT, Sloan School of Management, and Nokia. They were looking at how AI is being integrated increasingly into media production workflows, predictive audience analytics to enhance content targeting, virtual production of immersive storytelling, automation of tasks such as editing, captioning, and dubbing, and efficiency improvements in areas like animation and post-production. So they're also looking at concerns over IP, intellectual property, monetization strategies, and workforce adaptation. Despite being early adopters to new technologies, media and entertainment companies often struggle to adjust business models during technological disruptions. Don't I always talk about that? These big media establishment companies always struggle with digital disruption. They're late to it. They don't embrace it right away because it's also changing their model. That's why they're not going to do that. And that's why they're behind the game and try to play catch up. Success in the AI-driven area will require, newspapers, publishers, read this, new partnerships that go beyond traditional industry alliances, exploration of alternative revenue models that leverage AI-driven insights, and a balance between innovation and ethical considerations in content creation. Newspapers and publishers should probably be reading this. Arvind Patel, Chief Licensing Officer of news segments at Nokia, says that media brands must actively embrace AI. Quote, they should forge new alliances and think creatively about routes to monetization, and that AI should be viewed as a partner in creativity rather than as a replacement for human ingenuity. Agreed. It is not the end-all be-all, which is where corporations might think that. But yes, this is being said correctly. Laurel Ruma, Global Director of Custom Content at MIT Technology Review, said this, quote, the media and entertainment landscape is entering a transformative era where AI is no longer just a tool, but a catalyst for creative reinvention and operational efficiency. Success in this new era will require balancing experimentation with responsibility. And you can't expect big companies to be doing that. There will be startups and grassroots that will do this better than the big corporate companies will. They don't want to get into bed with other companies, with other partnerships. They want the revenue models that they already have in place to be profitable now until they don't work anymore. And that's the part that all comes in here. So very important what they're saying about this as well. It's from Data Economy that I took the story from. And in the meantime, while we're seeing a lot of lawsuits about AI being put out there and not being successfully won or just being settled out of court, we did get a ruling that went in favor of Thomson Reuters for the first AI copyright fair use ruling. Now, a judge ruled that a competitor cannot copy Thomson Reuters content for an AI legal platform. And major tech firms like OpenAI and Microsoft face lawsuits over AI training on copyright content. We just talked about that. So this past Tuesday, a former competitor of Thomson Reuters was not permitted to copy the company's content to build an AI legal-based platform, according to the U.S. copyright law. So it was U.S. Circuit Judge Stefanos Bibas making the decision, a summary judgment on direct infringement and fair use in Ross. So there is a time where they say this fair use legal theory has become a key defense for technology companies within copyright cases brought by authors, record labels, artists, and more. And the Thomson Reuters, the parent company of Reuters News, say they were glad that the court granted summary judgment in our favor, and that Westlaw's editorial content created and maintained by our attorney editors is protected by copyright, cannot be used without our consent. So there's a win on AI, but that hasn't happened a lot. And you can't expect it to continue to be like that. Last week, we talked about the American Music Fairness Act, and it's where it would ensure performers, not just songwriters, will get paid when AM/FM radio stations play their music. So the recording artists are now getting behind this. Let's go ahead and get into what actually has been said. 300 recording artists, more than 300, have now come together for this bill to get passed, requiring terrestrial radio stations to pay for them the rights to play their songs. And some of the music stars, in a letter that was obtained by NBC News to congressional leaders, some of those names that got on here were Aerosmith, Barbra Streisand, Selena Dion, Gloria Estefan, James Taylor, Jelly Roll, Lil Jon, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Mariah Carey, all arguing they are missing out on potentially billions of dollars of royalties they feel they are entitled to. So here's from the letter from this consolidation of musical artists. Quote, for decades now, corporate broadcasters have unjustly exploited an antiquated loophole in the law to profit from advertising generated from unlimited use of free music. Each year, AM/FM radio plays nearly 1 billion songs, and each year, giant radio corporations rake in billions of advertising dollars were refusing to pay a single cent to the artist behind the music. And that's calling out iHeartRadio, that's calling out Odyssey, Town Square, Urban One, Cumulus. Am I missing anybody? Citadel, Univision, yeah, all those. Televisa, Univision, right? All those companies do not get any money back. The letter calls for swift passage of the American Music Fairness Act, which would create a revenue stream for performers. Now, most terrestrial stations subscribe to licensing entities called performing rights organizations, the PROs. We know BMI, ASCAP, and others. And then they have the Copyright Royalty Board that handled the scale of the rates that are being paid for royalties. So NBC News actually makes the explanation of this. Organizations that represent radio stations have countered both broadcasters and musicians have been mutually benefited for the exposure provided by radio airplay, namely NAB. And they argue that royalties they pay through the licensing agreements are already very costly, and imposing yet another cost would seriously hurt the already struggling radio industry. And we know the pricing that has been set up and how they're going to do that. Singer-songwriter Carly Simon actually made a comment about this and says, quote, "When I started out, radio offered pre-promotion for artists who were looking to make it. That's no longer the case. In the digital age, fewer and fewer Americans are discovering new music on the radio. Instead, AM/FM is making billions of dollars each year in ad revenue without compensating the artists whose songs they play. This needs to end." Amen, Carly. Amen. Yes. I have been saying this over and over. Let me read this again. In the digital age, fewer and fewer Americans are discovering new music on the radio. And that's the big corporate companies that are doing that. Now, I didn't get to see this yet, but the R&B stars Boyz II Men made their case to lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and they're going to go and speak in committee, testify. Now, the members said, quote, "It's outrageous that big radio companies are able to make billions of dollars each year in ads while denying royalties to the performers whose music attracts listeners in the first place." Right. Right. And there's a story that comes off from Inside Radio. And they took this report from Borrell Associates. Average digital income for a radio station is more than $480,000. Average. Overall, the latest annual digital benchmarking report from RAB, Radio Advertising Bureau, and Borrell Associates, that digital revenue has topped $2 billion last year. At the local level, the radio industry now sells more video advertising than audio advertising, at least on the digital side of the business. And it's no longer a sideline business. The average digital income for a radio station comes in at $482,470. So they're making money. And if they have to go and pay royalties, they can take a little chunk off of that. Now, I don't know what that means for the traditional ad revenue that they're making for a station, but if digital revenue is right now coming in on average for these stations, say if it's one of these big 100,000 watt stations that one of these big radio companies own, and how much you're making off digital income. And if they're able to go and make any money where they're kind of holding on to it, or they're just squandering it, or just whatever they're doing, they're not making enough to handle what they're doing here. See, the musicians have the right idea here. We're not getting new music discovery on the radio, which is where they needed to be. And the promotion that the record labels also need to be involved in this too. Like radio and records need to be working with each other in lockstep. I said that last week. And the musicians are on the right on this as well. Absolutely right. So I am with, again, the musicians on this. And one more time, just like when the Music Modernization Act passed, 5 years ago? And when the musicians were behind that, I was happy for them to get that too. It's time for radio to start paying up. But I also have nefarious reasons why I want this to happen. Because like I said, if you make these big radio companies come in and they can't afford the royalties they have to pay out, someone else will. Okay? If you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your debt, and you can't pay the royalties, then these radio companies need to be out of business. They need to go ahead and sell these stations off to somebody else who can then afford to do it. And they'll be able to know how to properly manage and operate these stations better than these other big corporations at a much bigger level, and micromanage like they do. It's poor management. It's just poor maintenance of everything. You give these stations back to somebody that knows what they're doing about it. Oh, radio can actually have a renaissance. And I really believe that. By the way, radio, let's just put it like this. I don't think it necessarily has to subscribe to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And the radio landscape, we have diversification of programming. We used to have a thing where we had crossover. We'd have stations of various formats. And imagine if we had radio that was be able to be sold back to the masses, where you could have local radio owners of various demographics, represent a proper representation of the public out there. And imagine, you have all these stations that have different languages, different programming, and different music. And imagine they were getting properly promoted, and they let the artists that are local in that area or whatever there is, they get out there and get to promote, and they actually go out there and bring out new music and new artists. And imagine what we get. Remember, a lot of the songs we listen to on the radio or even listen to that are older, over and over, you have to understand that somehow, some way, we learn about certain songs, and then they become all of a sudden popular, right? And overnight sensation. I was just reading a story today because I was listening to one of my playlists on Spotify, and I heard Chris Isaac's Wicked Game. And I didn't even think about it, but I forgot about the fact that there was somebody, and I forget which station it was. They didn't say what station it was, but there was this song from Wicked Game, and I think it was, I forget, it was like Texas or something like that. It was some radio station, and a DJ decided to go ahead and play the song. And it was overnight hot. Number 6 song on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1989. And worldwide hit. All I'm saying is that that's how it used to be. I think I brought this up a few weeks ago when Shaggy had the song It Wasn't Me with Rick Rock, right? And then all of a sudden, that song blows up. It was a guy in Hawaii, Honolulu, Hawaii, on a radio station. He looked for it on Napster, found the song. It was on an album. He didn't even know anything about it. It was never a single that was pushed out by the record label. And Shaggy was under threat of losing his recording contract because of how poorly the album was going to underperform. And then this song blew up, and it resurrected his career. Give him another shot at hits for a while. And things like that could just happen. Like, it would be nice to just not just have it where it's just the radio, not just the radio, but it's also TikTok and the radio and other places you get new music discovery. And all of a sudden, hey, if there's a TikTok sensation, let them go on a radio station. Let's see radio stations become prominent again. And by the way, podcasting is such a normal thing right now in the first place, right? Now let's get back to the fact of if podcasts were being created on radio stations, imagine that. Everybody has their own little podcast set up with the microphones. Hey, there's these radio studios that all these different companies have and all these different radio stations have. And like, you could actually just take clips from there. And you could actually do a podcast type show on a radio station that's already built in. And it looks good, right? Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be a great idea? And all these stations people can find, and they could go look for it online. They can look for whatever their social media is. Like, wouldn't that be awesome? And there are certain creators that people want to go in and live stream. Oh, maybe they'll live stream the radio stations. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Or maybe better yet, maybe they'll turn on their AM, FM radio and find the station that's in their market. And they'll listen to them. Because we know that right now there's a limitation of what all these radio DJs are able to do at all, if they're able to even be on the air. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have looked right now of any radio DJs that will be on TikTok live streaming, but it's like, well, they're just sitting back there. They might have already pre-recorded their voice tracks, but they're not live. They're not interacting with callers and things like that. Like, or if they are, they're doing it like where it's pre-recorded. Imagine if they'd be able to get back to that again. And we had that full experience one more time. There was a time early on in the internet where when stations used to have a live studio cam and you could watch what was going on while it happened. People were really into it. That could still happen too. And I don't know why radio never decided to go ahead and adapt. But it's, of course, these big corporate radio companies, they have to control what's going on. And they've also basically run the rest of great talent out the door. So they will not even come into radio. But imagine if you had some creative content creators out there and you brought them into radio and they got a chance to be on. Oh my goodness. And let some other companies run the radio stations. And then maybe you have something where the musicians, they actually get the royalties like they're supposed to. Like, it's already bad enough. I just saw Jelly Roll on a TikTok video the other day about the record labels and what they're doing on deals with the artists now, especially with newer artists. They're in such a deep hole. If radio stations were their allies to help push them, so like the record deals are not so bad on their favor. Imagine that. Like, what was it we talked about 2 weeks ago? The FCC trying to go ahead and crack down on these free concerts where the radio stations are bribing the folks on Music Row to perform for them. Make money off of them. Not with them, off of them. And basically do prey in that way. Horrible. But it's been allowed. A couple other things I want to bring up very quickly. NASDAQ is issuing a delisting warning right now to Urban One. They might be dropped off the NASDAQ because their stock has gone down below $1 as the minimum bid price for more than 30 days. So they got 6 months to regain compliance with the minimum bid price. They at least need to be 10 consecutive days to have a $1 per share of their stock. So yeah, they're about to get pink stocked, like Odyssey. Urban One's about to get there. So all these big companies that are doing this, and look at that. Horrible. The NAB show is coming up in April, and they're going to focus on artificial intelligence. So they have some plans to go and talk about what they're going to do. So they're going to focus on artificial intelligence and its impact on the future for content creation, distribution, monetization, and audience management. It's April 5th and 9th in Las Vegas. You know, I wish I could go to that show and be a part of that, but that's probably something I'll never get to. I mean, listen, I'm already bad enough complaining about the fact that I can't get any of these podcaster conventions that can even get me to a show, right? I even offered the idea like, oh, you know what? I'll even go ahead and do, interviews with your fellow podcasters that come to the show. I would offer to go and work at the shows. I don't even care about if I'm speaking over there. But yeah, King of Podcasts, I have that name. And I'm like, amazing. These podcast conventions, NABs, and all these around, they don't even look at bringing me on. But that's okay. My weekly platform still stands. I'll be back next week. Until then, remember the content is king. Control of your content is in your hands.